got into more of those kinds of roles. I did comic book coloring, I did lettering, I did illustration and art direction, eventually editorial. I was taking a break for Christmas and New Year's, and I'd be back in January and hope that people liked it. And I got an email completely out of the blue from Scott McCloud, the guy, Understanding Comics. Amazing to me to think that I've been in the industry for quite a long time, but just I've only been known kind of as a writer probably over the last 10 to 15 years, balancing essentially two careers. At one point I was balancing three careers. Comic book fame is not real fame.
Hello friends, welcome to another episode of NRI Podcast. In an age of legends where tales were inked in fire and paper, and the clank of steel met the scratch of pen, rose a warrior of words and a weaver of worlds. From the shadowed alleys of Skull Kickers to the Thunder's Hall of Conan, and across the multiverse of Avengers, Dungeons and Dragons, and beyond, he has carved his name in his comic book lore. A professor of the craft, a mentor to the next guild of creators, and a bard whose saga is still being written. Please welcome the mighty Jim Zub. Welcome, Jim. Welcome to
Hey,
our podcast.
thank you. That was an epic intro. I really
I
appreciate
tried to go in a Conan style. I'm a big fan.
No, it's good. It was good. I like it.
Yeah.
No, it was fun though. Yeah, it's fun when you could kind of take that kind of lyricism. It was unexpected having it put to my own career though. Thank you. That's very kind.
No, even I was surprised because Anshul doesn't speak like this. So I was like, in which period I am? This is
All of a sudden, it just comes out of you, man. You work on Conan enough, and your vocabulary goes up, and the natural lyricism just sort of erupts out of you. You can't help it. That's just how we get it. So
I'm a big fan of Conan. I mean, back in India, I never read Conan, but we had its Indian equivalent, a character called Mahabali Shera. He was just inspired from Conan back in India in 70s and 80s. But when I came here and started reading the old Conan and the new Titan one, I was like mesmerized. So why hadn't I read this guy long before?
Amazing. I love hearing that.
Within our group, like we all talk about superheroes, but Anshul Bhai has always been about Conan.
Yeah,
right?
sword and sorcery stuff. That's awesome.
Yeah, like even the FBCD Conan book, he wants that, right? The rest he doesn't care. Like who has it?
Hopefully, with enough of a good chatter here, we will bring you into the fold as well, and then you will learn to appreciate it. Don't get me wrong, I love superheroes. I love all that stuff. But yeah, I really do bleed in sword and sorcery, so it's great.
Sure. Yes,
so Jim, so before hitting on your journey for Conan, right? I just wanted to know, since how did you came on this path of writing for comics books or the writing for... How did your career start in this?
Yeah. So my creative career started in art, actually. So I started in animation as an animator. I worked in Canadian animation for a few different studios. And I went to school, like after high school, I went to Sheridan College for classical, like the original kind of hand-drawn animation. And even by the time I was finishing school, the technology was really taking hold in a different way, and 3D and stuff like that. But I went out into the industry as a traditional animator, and then realized I was going to have to either, get a skill upgrade or something was going to have to change. So I was originally planning to go back to school for 3D animation. I was looking at the potential of maybe going into video games or something like that. But I'd always loved comics and was obsessed with them. And so while I was kind of making that transition or figuring out my next sort of career move, I had been working away on a web comic just for fun in after hours. And at the time, this was 2001. Like the internet is a thing, but it's not necessarily the mainstream thing, obviously, that it is now. And people putting comics online for free was still pretty novel. It was considered a little bit unexpected and odd. And there was a relatively small and tight community of people, many of which who are still in the industry now, like Ryan North, the guy who writes the Fantastic Four. He started as a webcomic creator right around the same time. The Penny Arcade guys or PvP or, like all these different comics were coming out online, and I started putting my own stuff on there as well, and meeting different people who were doing it at the time. And we sort of carved out our own little niche in terms of comic creation, and being able to put it out for free meant that you could build, a relatively solid readership, because it was novel. People could just get online and they could read your stuff anytime and get caught up on all the archives of it. And around Christmas time, I was taking a break from working on my comic, and I was young and really nervous about my work and hopeful that people were enjoying it. And it's not like now where there's social media and you're constantly interacting. And so I just put a little post on my front page saying I was taking a break for Christmas and New Year's, and I'd be back in January, and hope that people liked it. And I got an email completely out of the blue from Scott McCloud, the guy, Understanding Comics. And he said he really enjoyed it and he hoped that I would keep it up. And that started a dialogue between the two of us. And eventually, through people he met and people he introduced me to, that would lead me to go to my first San Diego Comic-Con, which was in 2002. And it kind of changed my life, because I thought I was going to be going back in animation. I thought I was going to sort of go on to 3D. And instead, I really found, the comic community very welcoming and engaging. And I realized how much I wanted to tell stories in that medium, and I wanted to be a part of it. So over the next handful of years, I would sort of pop around. I would work on my own webcomic stuff. I would sort of build up my own creativity. I ended up moving around the country a couple times for different jobs, finally settled back in Toronto and started working for the Udon Studio. They're known now primarily for publishing manga, translations and art books and things like that. But at the time, they were also doing a lot of comic book work. They were doing some comic book work for Marvel. Eventually, they were doing their own comics, like the Street Fighter comics that they still do to this day. And through them, I met tons of people. I started to understand really how the publishing industry worked. I went to tons of conventions and kind of built up that network that you need to kind of get your foot in the door and understand how the business works and what editors are looking for. And eventually I got into more of those kinds of roles. I did comic book coloring, I did lettering, I did illustration and art direction, eventually editorial. And the more that I learned about how to make a comic, the more excited I was to kind of get involved in it, and eventually transitioning over to being a writer and being able to use all the things I learned in all those different areas to make my own creator-owned book. And the one that you mentioned during that intro, Skull Kickers, that's the book that kind of put me on the radar for a lot of people. So we're talking, that's 9 years later. That's the Image book that I launched in 2010. And so it's kind of amazing to me to think that I've been in the industry for quite a long time, but just I've only been known kind of as a writer probably over the last 10 to 15 years, but I've been doing this more than 20.
I know it's the whole this whole career path is like, first you have to build your base and then shoot into limelight. I have a question which my American friends wouldn't like, but I have a question. How tough was it being an artist from Canada and being settled in Canada and getting the comics industry, which is basically run from all over from the US only?
Well, the thing is that as the internet has grown, it's really changed the whole publishing and creative industries. And I was lucky that I was part of that kind of wave moving forward and watching that transformation. I remember a time when, having something like a DeviantArt page was considered unprofessional, or the rise of social media where people were like, what is this thing? As a professional, you don't want to put yourself out there or expose yourself or you need to have your own website, and it's all very detached. And now it's like, okay, whatever way you're putting out artwork is valid, as long as you're able to get the work out there and it looks good and it feels good. So at first you could definitely feel that divide, that if you weren't in the US, particularly New York City or Los Angeles, that you were at a bit of a disadvantage. But the longer it went on, the community that forms around the internet was its own thing. And then Toronto has quite a strong art community as well. I mean, now, if you look at comic creators in Toronto alone, you've got, like I said, Ryan North and Jeff Lemire, Ray Fox, the Raid Studio, which is like 10 different artists, including, Marcus Toe and Ramon Perez and Scott Hepburn. Just trying to think of other people that
Jason, you have Jason Liu.
Oh, Jason Liu, of course, right? These are all like quite a robust crew of creators are here in Toronto. We've got our own little kind of hub. I'd say one of the strongest cities in North America now for comic book creators. And that's kind of grown organically over time. And so it's the kind of thing that the internet has helped to sort of pull people together. And now, of course, it's so much more common to work remotely. And, most of the art teams that I'm working with are on the other side of the world. I was just in Spain literally a week ago because I wanted to meet 3 of the Spaniards that I'm working with, so I went to Madrid after a trip to England, and these one of the guys lives in Madrid, but the other ones live close by, and they came into town. We did a bunch of signing events because I wanted to sort of get to know them personally and to be able to meet them in person, because it is cool to be able to work online. And it is amazing that we can work remotely, but I feel like the bonds are even stronger if we get to know each other, in person. So, but I think that's true of kind of your original question. How hard was it? It was difficult at first, but then you go to conventions and, the first time you meet someone, you're trying to make a good impression, or you meet an editor, or you meet publishers, or you meet other creatives. And then the longer you're in the game, the longer you stay around, as long as you're not a jerk, as long as you're putting out, good work, slowly but surely you break down those barriers. And that's really been key, is sort of sticking with it and constantly kind of being able to put out a new thing and both improve in terms of my skills, but also improve in terms of that social aspect of the whole thing.
Hey Jim, Amit
Okay.
here. I have
Hey.
a follow-up question. So I
Sure.
joined late. Sorry for that.
No worries.
I was not joining, but then I got
So
some
both,
free time.
both of these fellows, Prasenjit and Amit, they are from the West Coast,
Cool.
especially
Yeah.
California. Yeah.
California. So you were mentioning about like you're active from last 20 odd years, and
Yeah.
you like came on the radar in last 10 years. So is it something different you did in last 10 years, or is it like because in comics industry we are seeing some new artist or new writer, overnight success they're getting. So that also makes them lazy, I think, for the new artists. If they struggle for 2-3 years or 4 years, they will say, okay, we are not getting the break, we are moving into
Right.
animation industry or something somewhere else. But what different you did, or you did just what you were doing?
The different, when I was working in and around the Udon studio, I didn't have focused output in terms of my own stories. No one is going to pay you to do the work until you put out work that is of professional quality, right? Whether that's writing, whether that's artwork or coloring or lettering or any of those things. And just the regular output was so important, that both I was learning more, the more I was doing, but also that people, even if they missed, the first issue of Skull Kickers, we were coming out a month later, and a month after that, and a month after that, that eventually it's almost this, I'm going to be here. I'm sticking around, no matter what. And I'm going to keep making this thing. And that doesn't mean, I try and explain this to students and people trying to break into the business all the time. They may have it in their head that they're whatever, they want to write Wolverine, or they want to do a very specific project or work at a very specific company. I never set out and said, I'm going to work on the Avengers at Marvel. Like that's my, maybe that would have worked, but in my experience, that has not been the kind of thing that happens. You have to sort of put out work and then see who you meet, and then new opportunities come up, and you sort of take it all in and make decisions as those things come your way. Like, is this a good opportunity? Is this useful? Is this, a good use of my time and effort? Especially now when you can own and create your own stuff, thanks to crowdfunding, thanks to, digital release or printing stuff being more available, that we have at our fingertips the kind of production studio, on my desktop computer. We can make stuff that previously would have been very, very expensive, to do in terms of art and printing and output, promotion, and all those kinds of things. It means that you can have a smaller, kind of tighter output. Like I wish, back in the early 2000s, there was this kind of crowdfunding system, or the social media, or those kinds of things. Being able to watch those emerge, you see the bad of it, but you see a lot of the good in it too, that people have been able to carve out entire careers for themselves. Mm-hmm. And the more you kind of do this stuff and you learn, not only, like I said, do your skills get better, but you're also kind of proving that you're going to make professional quality work no matter what. And that appeals to publishers, that appeals to editors, because they're sort of like, well, this person's putting out this amazing work all the time, or they become a fan of it, or they hear about it, or they see more of it. Why can't they do that for us? And the answer is, well, of course I can, hire me and put me in, the a good spot, and then I can make that stuff for you and put out the kind of work that you want to see out there in the world. The reason why I'm doing so much sword and sorcery stuff now is because I made it very clear those are the kinds of stories I love to do. Those are the stories I'm good at. I've got, I've carved out a niche for myself that people are responding to. And I know sometimes it can feel very daunting, if you haven't gone through that sort of process. But in the end, it's like, I'm here to make stories. This is what I love to do, and I'm going to keep doing it over and over and over again. I'm very happy to do it on commercial, viable, whatever, kind of visible stuff like Dungeons and Dragons and Conan the Barbarian. But if I wasn't currently working on those things, I would still be making, comics. And I would still be making fantasy stories. And I would still be putting that stuff out there. I'm very, very fortunate that I've gotten to do it on these bigger properties that people recognize, and my career will benefit from that from now on. But it wouldn't have stopped me. I didn't make Skull Kickers because I thought, man, I hope the D&D guys like this and they hire me. I made Skull Kickers because I love those things, and I really wanted to make up my own story. Does that make sense?
The passion should be there. I got your answer, I think. So you keep doing it because you love it. It's not like you want, fame
and passion alone can't make something commercially viable.
Yeah.
Like I try and explain to people, don't throw good money after bad. Like if I joked with people, I said Skull Kickers was the most expensive hobby that I ever had because it didn't make money for a long time, right? Like, but it was never losing such a gargantuan amount of money that I was going to like screw up my bills or lose my house or something like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll talk to people and they have a very romanticized view of these creative industries. And so they're like, well, I'm going to take out a crazy loan and I'm going to make a comic. And I go, and in your head, the only version of this that you can see is that you succeed at the end, is that it all works out. Yeah. But it's like, dude, you can buy 10,000 lottery tickets and they can all be losers. Like that's not, the math is still not good. Like I would never, for a long time, I was balancing essentially two careers. At one point, I was balancing three careers. I was working on multiple freelance projects at Udon. I was teaching at a university here in Toronto, and I was trying to get my own creative career off the ground. And my wife was very, very patient, and my friends didn't see me for weeks and weeks at a time. And that was where I was deciding to dedicate my time and my efforts. And on the freelance stuff, I had a deal with my wife where essentially the teaching job could pay our bills. That would cover the mortgage and that would cover our bills. The freelance money was like, I guess most people would call that like play money. Do you know what I mean? I could have fun with it. But in this case, the fun was my hobby, and my hobby was funding Skull Kickers. So I would work for someone else to do freelance work, get a pot of money, and then I would hand it over to Edwin or Misty or Marshall, the art team that was doing Skull Kickers. And then we would put another issue out. And then I would get some money from Image, but it wasn't quite enough to balance the books. But I wasn't in the hole as much as I was before. So we could keep doing the book. And if we got 6 issues done, then I could get a trade paperback. And then a trade paperback meant we would get another influx of money. And then that could keep it. So it was just this like digging the hole, but not so deep that I was going to bury myself, but always a little, and then filling in the hole. So it was like we were never destroyed, but we were never quite, for a long time, we were not profitable. And then the weirdest thing happened, and I don't think this happens to every series, please don't get me wrong, that eventually we had 3 and 4 trade paperbacks out, and there was this sort of weird sense of like, well, they wouldn't put out a 4th book if it wasn't doing well. Oh. Do you know what I mean? It was almost there was this sense of, I keep hearing about this thing, and people talk about it, and we were selling okay, but there was this weird moment of like, it's still there. Well, all right, I'll give it a shot. And it was like, oh, this is better than I thought, or this is good, or no wonder it's still being put out. And you're sort of like, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of, man, I'm still here. I hope you like it. I'm still here. And I don't think we could have done that forever. We definitely had an endpoint. We did 6 books total on that series, but it was a really good platform for me to be able to show people I could tell stories, that I could put a professional book consistently. And I started to get more and more freelance work because of it, because my identity as a writer was being established, And because Skull Kickers was this kind of fun, wry action book, I started to get asked to do fun sword and sorcery or action books or team ensemble kind of stuff. And then once a couple of those did okay, it became again that thing of, well, now I can go to more conventions, or now I have more stuff at my table, or now I'm building, outwards from there. And you can see this really distinct shift those first few years, particularly of Skull Kickers. I'm essentially financing my own career. I'm putting out work just on my own money, and obviously the people that I'm collaborating with and their incredibly, hard work that they're putting into it. And then eventually I start getting a few commercial projects, and it's like, okay, now those turn into more, and less of my work becomes self-financed and more of it becomes the commercial work.
Mhm.
And then I put out Wayward in 2014, and that was really fortunate timing. The Walking Dead TV show was an explosive hit. Everyone was kind of looking at Image Creator-Owned Comics and saying, well, what's the next big Walking Dead? What's the next big thing? And so all those number ones that were coming out were like, what's the hot things? You got like Chew and Morning Glories and eventually Rat Queens and all that sort of stuff. And we release in the midst of all that. And the first issue of Wayward sells really, really well. And because it did so well, and the way the Image model works, you get a good chunk of that profits once it is a profitable venture. We had a war chest that we could do that series without ever losing money. Like, we did 30 issues of Wayward and we never, ever were, in the hole. We had money all the way through because the first issue literally paid for more than our first story arc. And by the time the trade paperback came out, Image had a really aggressive trade program. And so we always had a budget for Wayward. It wasn't about freelancing in order to pay for the book. It was paying for itself and more. And the weird moment when I didn't have to go to my wife and say, okay, here's how the finances all shake out. It was, hey, I can make an extra payment on the house because comics are making money instead of.
So Wayward become an investment for you, right? Like that.
Yeah, Wayward was the series that, like, now once Wayward came out, it was like, that's when I started doing work for DC. That's when I started doing work for Marvel. That was the book that really got me on their radar. Like, they might have seen Skull Kickers and might have thought it was interesting, but it was like Wayward was the one where people go, oh, this guy can do different stuff. And, he's really putting out a consistent book. And we had just really good buzz on it.
The D&D happened after they were, right? Or
right around the same time. So I had done the Pathfinder comic series, which is based on a role-playing game for a company called Paizo. It was published by Dynamite, and that was like a fantasy, game. It was very much in that D&D model, and it had gone very well. And I had wrapped up on that, and I had done a couple little DC projects, and then one of them had fallen through. And I did the Samurai Jack comic over at IDW. And that was a huge turning point for me. The Samurai Jack book was supposed to be a mini series, and it sold so well that they made it an ongoing. So instead of doing like 5 issues, we did 20. And that series got a lot of good buzz. People really, really enjoyed it. And right around that time, I started to get, like, a lot of publishers were sort of interested. But the D&D thing happened because Ted Adams, the guy who owned IDW, he came to me at a convention and he said, Samurai Jack is one of my favorite things that we publish. I want you to do more work for us. What are you interested in of all the properties that we have all the licenses for? And I said, either Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Dungeons and Dragons. And he said, well, Kevin Eastman's coming back to work on Turtles. And no offense, that guy's kind of got precedent. But he said, why Dungeons and Dragons? And I was like, I grew up on D&D. It's my favorite thing. I wouldn't be a storyteller without D&D. My brother and I were obsessed with it when we were kids. And he said to me, and I've told the story multiple times, so I'm not really talking out of school, but that the Wizards of the Coast was a huge pain in the ass, and that it was a really hard book for them, and it never sold well enough versus the amount of time and effort that it took. They were like, we have D&D as part of what they called the Hasbro master license. So that included G.I. Joe and Transformers and Barbie and like all this other stuff. So we are allowed to do D&D books, but every time we do them, they don't sell great and no one seems to care. And he was like, honestly, I don't think it's worth your time to do a D&D book. And I said, I don't care. I really want to do it anyways. Like, I'm just passionate about it. And at the time they were developing a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons because the games, I don't know if you're gamers, but it goes through major iterations of the rules. And so the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons was going to come out at the end of 2014. And I said, if you're going to do a D&D comic, you should launch it alongside the new edition, because that's your best shot at getting eyeballs on it. because there'll be a lot of people talking about D&D and free advertising around the brand. And he said, well, you convinced me, like I'll set up a call with Wizards of the Coast and we'll see if we can make this work. And so that's how I started working on the D&D comics. And then the D&D comics, like the person at the Wizards of the Coast office that reviewed the comics and would approve them, he could instantly tell in all my scripts that I was a huge Dungeons and Dragons nerd, that I was making very specific call outs and I was sending very intense reference to the artist. And so he contacted me directly and he was like, man, you are like deep into this stuff. Do you want to start working for us directly outside of the comics? So I started doing consulting and writing for them because they could just see that I had, that I was deeply into it. So.
So Jim, you mentioned writing, right? But looking at your start of your career also, right? You have been an arts professor and studied 3D animation.
Right.
Why didn't you try on drawing? Why you moved towards writing?
The reality is, I like to draw. I'm a pretty good artist. I can complete, professional quality work. It sometimes throws people off when they come to conventions and I'm doing head sketches and they're like, so you're the artist. I'm like, no, I'm the writer. Why are you drawing? It's like, well, am I not allowed to, or, whatever. But
I have one of your remarks of Conan done on my book and it's fabulous.
Oh, thank you. It's like, but the reality is I also, as an art teacher, I know exactly how much time this stuff takes. And I can put out 3 times, 4 times as many stories as a writer than I can as an artist. And I love the act of storytelling. I love collaborating with those teams. I love building that stuff. And I also know what my own art style is most appropriate for. And it's not necessarily Conan the Barbarian or the Avengers or things like that. Could I draw that stuff? Yeah, but the amount of time it would take me to put it out is not monthly. Like I would not be, at least not at the current, kind of rate. And so in my head, I sort of joke around that one of my retirement goals is to do my own graphic novel again, like I did with the webcomic, and I'll do everything. I'll do the writing and the drawing and the lettering. And if it takes way too long, who cares, because it's on a specific deadline and I can lavish that attention on it. But the reality of publishing is that you need more regular output. And I'm honest with myself about my quality. And I think sometimes that throws people off where they're like, I don't know why you don't draw, whatever comic you're writing. And you're like, oh, I'm not half as good. Like I'm not as good a Rick and Morty artist as Troy Little. And I never will be. I'll never be the Conan artist that, Fernando Dagnino and Rob De La Torre and Doug Braithwaite are. But I have enough art knowledge that I know their strengths and I know what they're capable of, and we can speak the same language. And so it's a real net positive for me. It is a secret weapon that I know art and we can talk very specifically about whatever, posing or anatomy or gesture or composition or light and shadow or mood and atmosphere and color theory with the colorist, or that I'm not just sort of saying, hey, can we make it scarier? You know what I mean? That I can be like, hey, this is a very specific thing we could do, or I like what you've done here. And not just critique. When I compliment my artists, I'm very specific, like in a way, like I am with my students, you know what I mean? That I say to them, this is a beautiful piece for these reasons. And I know exactly how much effort that takes. And I know how hard you're working. And goddamn, look how cool this is, that we're doing this together. And I think that they deeply appreciate that, because a lot of times, even when you like something, the people are sending artwork over email and here's a new page and they spent 6-7 hours on it. And the feedback is, looks great. You know what I mean? You spent 6 hours on it. And I go, cool, man, keep going, and you see that all the time. And as an artist, on the one hand, they didn't send you a bunch of edits, which is good. You're like, cool, approved. But there's something very hollow sounding, even when it's a compliment, when they're saying just like, yep, you're doing it, buddy. Keep at it. If I say to them, dude, here's why I think this page is so beautiful. I know exactly what you're doing here. And I think it's really cool. This is what I really love about your artwork. And this is why you're a great collaborator, man. I'm so pumped. And next time I see you, we're going to raise a glass and toast how badass you are. You know what I mean? Like that sticks with people. And I'm not lying. I'm not making up those compliments. I'm very specific about what I'm saying, and in the same way, our job is communication and entertainment, right? And the first people I have to communicate with is my creative team, my editor, my artist, my colorist and letterer and everyone else. And so good communication, good relationship building, good everything, right? And then entertainment in that sense of that they know why we're doing what we're doing and that they're excited for what we're putting together and they know where we're headed with it. And so when I'm sending someone a critique, it's not just like, hey, change this. It's like, here's why we need to change this. And if I can say it to you in a compelling enough way, you'll want to fix it instead of like grumble your way through it. You're like, you agree this is going to make for a better final result. Like 2 days ago, an artist sent me a page and it's very well drawn. I think it looks really good and it's digital. So we have the ability, to make those edits pretty easily. And I noticed something about the posing that I was like, I think we can get a little more clarity and drama out of it if we just change the posing a little bit. And I'm not here to like micromanage you, but I did notice this thing. If it's something you agree, and you want to make this little fix, I think the end result will be stronger for it. And the guy came back and he was just like, man, that was like a really thoughtful, nuanced little bit of critique. I agree. I'm going to, adjust that thing. And thank you for paying attention, essentially, instead of just being like, yep, good enough, next email or whatever. So, this is why when people say to me, they go, how long does it take to write a comic? It's like the physical act of writing a script is one thing, but every comic is a series of communications back and forth between the whole creative team. And if you're working on a monthly title, you're looking at, oh my God, I'm brainstorming stuff. The schedule we've got on Conan is quite further out than most other comics I've ever worked on. So like I'm writing stuff that's coming out end of the year right now, December, January, but I'm brainstorming stuff coming out next spring. I'm writing the scripts for the stuff coming out end of the fall. Art is in all those various stages of production. So some issues are in the rough kind of page phase. Some of them are final line art. Some of them are colors for a different issue. Some of them are lettering for the issue that's already been colored. So I'm looking at 6-7 comics at a time, right? It's like all on that pipeline. And then one of them gets done and it goes out the door off to the printer and you hope you didn't screw it up. And then the next one, it's like the next one enters the ring and you're like, okay, here's a new one starting off. Remember that script you wrote 3 months ago or 2 months ago or 4 weeks ago? Now the guy's starting to rough it out. Is that what you imagined it would be? Go back to that script. Does that make sense? Did they have all the reference material that you were putting together? If not, why not? Get that stuff out to them. Let's get on a call. Let's go over it page by page, or let's talk about how it's going to work. Oh, the colors are coming in. Oh God, did I not tell the guy that's a night scene? Oh no. Okay. We got to, he sent in 2 pages and he did daylight and I'm an idiot. Why didn't I, I don't make that mistake very often, but that kind of a thing can happen. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, this is now the ultimate priority. So as much as you might say, well, how long does it take you to write a script? It's like uninterrupted, not very long. How many times do I get uninterrupted time? You know what I mean? Like versus, am I going to a convention? Am I looking at colors? Are we proofing out the lettering? Are we jumping on a call with, the editor? Are we talking about what's our variant cover is going to be 6 months from now? Hey, the event book that we're going to do, who's going to draw that? Do you think we can get them on the schedule now? Oh, do you have a contact email for that person? I don't know. Let me look it up. Like my inbox is this weird, it's a constant battle of new stuff coming in. And I'm excited. I love that I'm working with so many different artists, that there's new piece of art coming in practically every day of the week. And it's very inspiring. But it's like this weird little moment of snapshot moment of, oh, that's the 12th page of this event book that's coming out in October. Is that the right scene? And I look at it and I go, yeah, it's all there. And then I'm saying to myself, wait, what is that? And I go back, check my script. Okay, yeah, that's right. That all works. That's still cool. And then get back to my writing or whatever. And then 15 minutes later, you're like, oh, colors just came in for the thing. I should look at that. So there's times where it's like, you almost have to turn off the internet and go, okay, give me 3 hours just to write. And of course, the minute I do that, that's when like my mother calls or like my wife is like, hey, did you know there's something screwed up with the car? And you're just like, oh God, so one of the things about working from home is that weird feeling of like,
do you use any project management tool? Because it seems like, you're doing like similar to IT work, right?
No, I'm not trying to complain or make it seem like, oh, woe is me. Like it's still comics. It's really fun.
Yes.
But you have those weird moments when you're freelancing And because you work from home, you have those things that people say, man, you set your own hours. You're like, true.
Yeah.
But that those hours can also mean like today's Sunday.
Midnight also. Yeah.
Yeah. And I woke up at 7 o'clock this morning and I answered 12 emails and then I had breakfast, and then my brother and I will play like video games for a couple hours, usually on a Sunday morning, because it's one of the ways we stay in touch. So we played video games for a few hours. And then my wife's like, hey, did you know we're missing these groceries? And you're like, oh crap. And then, what am I making for dinner tonight? Oh yeah, I've got to get some ingredients and stuff. And so it's like my Sunday is just going to get eaten up, and then I've got this interview in the afternoon. Okay. So I'm blocking out my time around, this podcast or whatever else. And it's fine. Google Calendar is our lifesaver. My wife and I have a shared Google Calendar. And we say it to each other militantly. If it's not on the calendar, it doesn't exist. Like, and sometimes it's like
give me a good idea. I'm gonna do that with my wife.
Yeah, if it's not on the calendar, so there's this weird thing where it's like you literally are like, I'm scheduling calling my parents, or like you're scheduling whatever. We got brunch with friends, and you think just brunch with friends would just be casual, but it's like it's got to be on the calendar, because if it's not on the calendar, something else is going to smash its way in there, So we kind of live and die by it. We really do. When we're on the thing or we're on the clock, and I'll say to her, oh yeah, don't forget, we got this thing. And she goes, is it on the calendar? Then I won't forget, that's how we function in that kind of a way. So.
Yeah, I get the reminder to pick my daughter up from school. So my
right?
wife had put it over.
And you're like, how could you forget? And you're like, well,
no, because we did forget, actually.
You're right. You're like, things get crazy, man. Or you're just absorbed. I mean, the best case scenario is that the afternoon vanishes because I am writing, because 3 hours went by because I had uninterrupted time, and the muses are kissing your fingertips, or whatever analogy you want to use. Those are the moments you cherish. There's times when I've come down to the dinner table and I'm sort of staring, and my wife's like, what's going on? I'm like, I just need to eat and I got to get back upstairs because I've kind of got the lightning right now. And she's like,
still stuck in another world.
Yeah, I'm in the zone right now, and it doesn't come around as often as you hope, but when it does, you really try and embrace it. So
like you already gave a corporate glimpse of the freelance world, right? Like you had past project that you still are like working on, new projects coming, and there are other stuff also, right? Like all that needs to be managed.
Because you're a freelancer, you're also like, Conan is the majority of my time right now, but I'm not exclusive on that. So there's always that weird sort of oh, are you available for this? And you're like, maybe. Like, what does it entail? What's the schedule? What's the budget? And people are like, oh, we don't know yet. Okay, well, when drop me a line. Or someone's like, oh, we should meet up at, whatever, San Diego, and we could talk about this potential project. Okay, well, that's late July. So until then, I'm not going to worry about it. But if you tell me this is a thing coming this October, I can probably tell you maybe I can't do it because I'm probably already booked, or, things like that. So it's that weird thing. You're trying to keep the light on, but you also don't want to overburden yourself with so many projects that you start screwing them up. I mean, it's a good problem to have. I'm very, very thankful. The very first time I started turning down work was like a surreal moment, because early on, you want legitimacy so much. You want to prove yourself. You want as many credits as possible. You want the phone to ring, like, please think of me for your next project, anytime, anything. And people are like, can you write this? You're damn right I can. I can write whatever. If you even thought of me for a moment, I can do it, and then eventually you finally, you hopefully establish enough credits and enough credibility, and hopefully your finances are in a position where you get to that point where you're just like, you know what, that is not a good fit, or that schedule's too tight, or that budget's too low, or whatever may have you. And those are weird moments. I know I've talked to a few other people, and it's not something, it's really valuable to have, friends in the industry, both, of course, in terms of contacts and professionalism, but just honestly, people that understand what you're doing. Because I've seen people, particularly in creative industries, they will complain about their job. And the reality is, on social media, you can't really do that. Like, I am doing what for most people is an absolute dream job, right? I'm contributing to these amazing franchises. I get to work with all these incredible artists. I'm traveling all over the place. Like, I can complain a little bit and go, man, I got jet lag real bad. And they're like, yeah, you have jet lag because you went to England and Spain to sign comic
privileged
books.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, the champagne problem that you have. Like, but if I talk to whatever Chip Zdarsky, the writer on Batman and Spider-Man, who's a dear friend of mine, and I'm like, dude, I'm jet lagged so bad right now. Like, I feel like my head is an anchor and I can't even get out of bed. And he's like, oh, dude, I've been there. It's so rough. And that is the person I can complain to about.
He talks in Batman voice?
Well, no, he doesn't talk in a Batman voice. Actually, Chip doesn't talk. That would be amazing if he talked in a Batman voice. If he was just like, "All right, Jim, here's how it's gonna work." No, but like, but people who are in your industry and are kind of, have done the things you've done. Those are the people where you're like, oh, I don't know what's going on with this editor or this publisher or this artist or this whatever, because they've been there. If you just shoot your mouth off online about that, that's never going to go well. Because people are just going
to. We can relate, I think, because we all are from like software industry.
Exactly. But if you're like, dude, I pump gas for a living, or I work in a warehouse, like, shut up. Like, when you're working on Batman or you're working on superheroes, like, oh no, your life is so hard because a dude on Twitter called you a name or something. Like, it's just,
So I'll follow up on what Amit has asked earlier, right? So, like, in your, like, say 2 decades of your journey, where after Conan you are more known, right? But before that, there was a whole journey, right? And
sure. I mean, I've had multiple kind of milestones in terms of visibility. Dungeons and Dragons was a big one. Samurai Jack, the Marvel stuff obviously was huge. And now Conan feels like a whole new level. Like the one that the recent one in particular, that has really changed my creative career and my life. In some weird ways, it's been very exciting, but comic book fame is not real fame. Like, that's what's, in some ways it's really good if you're in a convention. So the Toronto Comic Arts Festival is on right now. It's like a small indie art comic festival here in Toronto. I went yesterday and I wasn't set up because I wasn't even sure I was going to be in town for it. And so I just went to see some friends and say hello and buy some books. And I'm wandering around the aisle and I'm browsing some random person's table and they go, "Are you Jim Zub?" And you're like, "Yes." In the context of a comic book event, occasionally I will be recognized. If I walk 4 blocks away from that place, no one will ever know who I am. And that is the best kind of fame, or whatever you want to call it. Like, you're not going to be recognized 99.9% of the time, and it's great. But in the context when I walk into the convention center, if I'm behind my table, great. If I'm not behind my table, occasionally someone will be like, "Oh man, I love your work," or whatever. Great, cool. But it's never creepy or weird. Well, I guess not never. Very, very rarely is it, creepy and weird. So it's
like in the eyes of fans, you are a celebrity, but in a different world, you are nobody. That's what you're trying to probably.
And it doesn't matter who you are. Like, I remember Dan Slott telling me about his mother complaining, that about stuff, and I was laughing because you're like, dude, you're the biggest writer of Spider-Man ever, and your mom's just complaining to you. But you're like, everyone has a mom. Everyone doesn't matter who you are. I remember him saying, like, his mother said, "So I thought Spider-Man was the biggest superhero in the world," and he goes, "Well, he is. Well, Batman sells better than Spider-Man."
Whoa!
It was like, so and then I'm sure Scott Snyder's mother would say, "It's like it. It doesn't."
So because what I was leading to, right? Like, it seems that in the initial stages, it's like a bunch of P's. You need passion, you need perseverance, patience, and prudence. All of them together.
Skill, like the skill that you get from learning the craft, but also the skill from executing on the craft. You can read as many tutorials as you want. You can read how to write books. You can watch endless numbers of YouTube videos, and they can be helpful to you. They can kickstart your brain or help you through some troubled spots. But the act of doing and the act of finishing projects is always going to be your best learning methodology, even in the cases where it's what not to do, where I can tell you've got to pay attention to the art, or you've got to find the right artist for the right project, or you've got to treat people properly or communicate well, and you can nod and you can say yes, and then you have an actual creative team and you're trying to keep them cohesive, and the minute you have to do it, you're like, oh, okay, that's what it means. Oh, okay, that's why that's so important, or that's how they misinterpret, or that's why yeah, you have to do it and you have to finish it. I always recommend to people starting out that they do shorter, smaller projects, because then that sort of fast tracks. The mistake that people make is the very first thing they want to make is the epic that they've always had in their mind, and you're like, dude, by the time you finish issue 1, you will be a different creator than you were at the start. And so if you do a one-shot comic or a short story and you finish it, especially for your first thing, by the time you finish it, if you're working with an art team, you will know whether or not you want to keep working with that art team.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing you want to do is hitch yourself to people and go, okay, we're in for 2 years of working together, and 3 weeks into it, you're like, this sucks. Like, these people we don't jive. We're not doing the same thing. We don't want the same things. We don't communicate the same way. We don't understand each other. The art is not what I thought it was going to be, or whatever. And now you've hitched yourself to this thing, and it's just going to be a disaster. So better to do shorter, smaller, what we call proof of concept.
Mm-hmm.
Skull Kickers began as 2 short stories that we did for the Pop Gun anthology.
Yes.
And there was a different artist, Chris Stevens, and he did these beautiful digital painted pages. And he's an amazing, amazing, amazing artist. But there was no way that guy was going to be a monthly comic book artist. And on top of that, there was no way financially he could ride out the highs and lows of an independent comic in that way. He had different financial obligations. Edwin Huang, I think, was like 22, 23. And he was just coming out of art school. He was already used to eating ramen and not, he didn't have, it sounds awkward, but it's like he was already used to living like a student. So it was going to be, here's 2 more years of living like a student, but we might be able to make a career out of it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a different kind of a mindset. So that's the thing. You got to find the right people for the right project. And then once you find really good people and you work well with them, treat them better than, anyone else you can imagine, or treat them even better than you would like to be treated. Make sure that they feel well appreciated and well paid for as humanly possible. And just kind of build from there as much as I can. We're doing a new reprinting of Skull Kickers at Oni, and I contacted Edwin. I probably haven't talked to him in over a year. And when we do talk, it's always like quick 5 minutes at a convention. He's doing work for Capcom and all these other companies, video game companies, all this stuff. But the minute that I stop by, there's a warmth there because we were in the trenches together building our creative careers. And I was like, hey man, we're going to reprint Skull Kickers again over at Oni. I think it'd be a lot of fun if we had some new covers. And he's like, I'm on it. It would be my pleasure, my honor, to do new artwork. And he goes, because that old stuff, some of it, I can't stand it anymore. And I was like, well, we're still reprinting the old pages. You have to live with that. But
it happens to us when we go and take a look at what we did earlier, and we say, oh, how come we did it?
True. But on the other hand, I think that that's a good thing, that you can see that growth in your own work. I think it's also really important when someone brings you those books, if it's their favorite thing or they want it to get autographed. I've seen creators do this sometimes, and they'll slag their own work in front of people. You're like, dude, that person brought that to the convention for you to sign. Like, just be cool. Like, just, oh, this is your favorite thing ever? That's great. I love to hear that. That's amazing. Would you like to read my newest thing? Which I think is even better. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the, let me, take that momentum and push you towards my latest project, rather than being like, oh, I sucked back then, or whatever.
I think Anshul, bro, we should take the questions we have. I'm
not
not Jim is here for 1 hour, right?
Approximately, yeah.
So I think we should take
a question before we go to the audience. I'll just come back with Conan. So Conan happened because of your work with D&D, right?
Sort of. Like, yeah, I mean, because of D&D, there was an aggregate sort of, Jim is the sword and sorcery guy, and he's very capable. But I had Gail Simone actually reached out to me. Yeah, I think, because of D&D and the sword and sorcery stuff, and we were friends. She was writing Red Sonja at the time, and the 2 characters, it gets complicated. They started off as both in the Marvel universe, and they would cross over all the time. Eventually the rights became separated because of media stuff. And now Conan and Red Sonja are 2 separate properties that are both in the Hyborian Age, which is this fictional, fantasy world. So they're in the same world, but they don't cross over with each other because of legal whatevers. But they had worked out a deal between Dark Horse and Dynamite that the characters would cross over again for the first time in, I want to say 15 or 16 years. and Gail was going to write it, and she wanted a writing partner so that just like how Conan and Red Sonja were teamed up, there were going to be 2 writers teamed up. And she recommended me for the gig, and she knew I was a big Conan fan. And so we worked on that together. We did a 4-issue miniseries, and I thought that will be my only chance to ever write Conan, because what a cool, crazy opportunity. And we did, and it was fun. And then but that was 2015. By the time we got to, 2018, I was doing regular work for Marvel. I was working on Avengers. I had worked on, I was co-writing Iron Man at the time. I was doing Black Panther and the Agents of Wakanda and Champions and all sorts of stuff. And Tom Brevoort in the Avengers office was probably the biggest champion of me over at Marvel. He was giving me more work than anyone else. And we were at a convention, and we had just done an Avengers project, and he let me know that they were getting Conan back at Marvel, and he wanted me to be involved. And obviously I was like, oh my God, that would be amazing. So we used Conan in an Avengers event called No Road Home. And I wrote almost all the Conan stuff in there. And then Jason Aaron launched the monthly book, Jason Aaron and Mahmoud Asrar. And I was used to Jason doing crazy long runs on books. So Jason's going to do a book. It's like, well, that's untouchable for 4 years or whatever. But I didn't know Jason was only going to do 1 year on Conan. And so almost as soon as he started working on the book, remember I talked about you having 6, 7 issues you're looking at the same time. Mm-hmm. By the time the issue comes out, they're already producing issue 7, 8, 9. So they were only a handful of months away to running out of stuff. And so they were almost immediately looking for a new Conan writer. And I had pitched, they were doing 2 series. They were doing the main monthly book, and then they were doing another series called Savage Sword, which was going to be an anthology series with multiple stories. And so I pitched just a Conan story. And the reason why was because it was an ego thing. I know this is going to sound weird, but like Conan Red Sonja was co-written with Gail, and I know exactly what I wrote, but no one else really knows which parts are mine and which parts are Gail's. And then I wrote No Road Home with Al Ewing and Mark Waid, and I know what I wrote, but no one else knows. So like both my Conan projects were co-written. So you could sort of argue, well, which parts are even yours? And I was like, okay, I'm going to write a Conan story that's all me. So if you like it or don't like it, you know who wrote it, And so I pitched Mark Basso, who was the editor for the Conan stuff, this story called The Gambler. It was a very old school pulpy kind of story in the mold of Robert E. Howard, the guy who wrote the original Conan stories in the 30s. Because I had done Conan running around with the Avengers and I had done Conan running around with Red Sonja, I just kind of wanted to get back to the core of that character, that like classic kind of fantasy pulp stuff. And Patch Zurcher drew the hell out of it. And that was the story that got me on the radar for the rights holders for Conan. They had approved the other stuff, but I don't think my name stood out. And then that story, they were like, oh, this guy's good. Like this feels like the kind of stuff we're looking for. And Jason's going to be moving off the book. And then they asked me if I knew the other Robert E. Howard characters, would I be willing to write a crossover book? So I did this book called Serpent War, which was like Conan and Dark Agnes and Solomon Kane, and this obscure Robert E. Howard character called James Allison. And as soon as I sent that in, Mark, my editor, asked if we could jump on a phone call. And normally when an editor calls you, it's because they have bad news and they don't want to put it in an email. So I thought I was going to get fired or something. I thought it was like, oh, crap. I guess they really didn't like that one. And instead he called me and he said, Jason's going to be heading off the book after issue 12. We want to offer it to you, So it was very cool. And then that was when I started writing Conan at Marvel. And almost as soon as we started, things got all screwed up. And that wasn't anyone's fault. It was just I did 2 issues of the monthly, and then the pandemic stuff really hit. So we had lockdowns. I don't know if you know the term pencils down, where a whole bunch of projects just stopped cold.
Yeah, we had
yeah. So I essentially got to do one of my favorite things. And then 2 months into it, it was just like paralyzed, like just paused, and everything was screwed up. And I didn't think we were ever going to keep the book going. I know it sounds hyperbolic now, but there was a few weeks there where I thought, oh, maybe this is the end of the North American comic book industry. Like maybe it's just, there's no more conventions and no one's leaving their houses and nothing's going to get published. And, Marvel will keep making movies, but they don't need to publish comics. Like they can just take all their old crap and do that forever. and I'm the last writer of Conan the Barbarian. Like, I don't know how this is going to work. And we came back, but coming back was awkward. It was like 7 months later. So our sales were in the toilet. And it was really awkward. Everyone was working really hard on the book, but everyone was also distracted with the state of the world. And are there going to be vaccines and like all this other stuff, understandably. And so no one was prioritizing Conan, understandably. And eventually Marvel wrapped up their license. And I thought, well, I got to limp out like 12 issues. I was proud of them, but it wasn't what we wanted it to be. And then the license got wrapped up, and the people who own Conan were like, sorry, it didn't work out, Jim. We really like you. Stay in touch. And I was like, sure, that's what everyone says. that's what professional people do. They're like, fare thee well, and onward you go. But they actually did want me to stay in touch, and I ended up pitching for their new publishing initiative against a bunch of other writers, and somehow caught the diamond again, and managed to do this new publishing initiative with Conan, and it's really struck fire. People have really love what we're doing. They feel like we've kind of reignited something very special in the character. And I felt like I had a lot to prove, like I really wanted to show people why the character was great and what I love about it. And God, you're giving me a second chance on one of my favorite things. I better not screw this up, And we got the right artist and the right team and the right, all the pieces were finally in place. So
I think one of the reasons why this Conan struck with most of the people was because it stayed true to its roots, means the original Conan. And
yeah, the good thing is that we had time to develop it too. Like Heroic Signatures, the guys who own the Robert E. Howard character library, they knew that they wanted a little bit of a gap between the end of the Marvel run and whatever came next. And so we had like 8 or 9 months just to do development. That's not very often the way comics work. Comics tend to be this breakneck pace. Like I remember when I got given Conan, I think I had a week to give them story ideas, and I think I had 3 weeks for my first script. Oh. And it's like, there's not a lot of time to sort of like relearn the character or marinate in the material, but that's the job. And most of the time it's fine. But in this case, having those extra weeks really I got to do deeper research, and I got to really kind of sit with it and stew with it and think about it and talk to the editor at length about it until we felt like we really had a super solid, approach that, and you never know whether it's going to be commercially viable, but at least creatively, it felt like it had a lot, going for it in that way.
So you let it marinate for longer. It turned out to a nice dish.
Yeah. And like I said, I've done projects under the gun and they've turned out great. And I've done projects where I've had lots of time and it turned out crappy. You never know what the different ingredients, how they're going to come together. But in this case, it was the right pieces. And there's been books that I've worked very hard on that I've been very creatively proud of, and they've sold like crap. Like it's not always. You hope that the things that are the most creatively fulfilling for you are also the most commercially successful, but it's not always 1-to-1, and that's the thing. You need to also understand what your own personal measurements of success are. Sometimes they're good relationships. Sometimes they're great working processes or beautiful artwork, or the story that you set out to tell you felt was very effective. And you hope that those are also going to sell on that commensurate level, but you don't know. The market is fickle and strange, and sometimes the world is overcome with a pandemic once in a generation, and you have no control of these things, so you can't always beat yourself up over that stuff.
Okay, should we move to the questions, Anshul?